First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Unlike many of you, I am not a refugee from an oppressive religious background. My upbringing was centered in a benevolent Presbyterian community with parents who epitomized that benevolence. Church-going for me was more of a conditioned reflex than a requirement. I found the community congenial, the music pleasant, and the Bible stories interesting. Religious doctrine was not presented dogmatically. I don't recall buying into it very much, but there was plenty of positive conditioning to reinforce my going along with it. For example, we learned a series of songs listing the Bible books in order. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the books of the law. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, the history book. You get the picture, and I won't sing them for you, but I could. It was in this setting that at the age of 12, I encountered my first great religious teacher, an unassuming layman with a deep interest in the subject, who at our first Sunday school meeting told us, in religion, accept nothing on authority. Wow. In religion, accept nothing on authority. This radical statement marked the beginning of my latent Unitarianism, as well as my ongoing fascination with the psychology of religion. Word of my interest apparently reached our minister as he asked my mother if he might speak to me about pursuing the ministry. A request my mother diplomatically but emphatically turned down. Thank you, Mom. Thank you forever. Can you imagine? I mean, I have to do this every week and someone would have to hear it. That would be terrible. Only recently, though, have I realized the extent to which all of these experiences drove my academic interest, such as Emerson, Hawthorne, and Emily Dickinson, but also their British contemporaries, for whom honest doubt was a risky business, and notably the intellectual giant George Eliot. She, who was outcast by her family for refusing to assent to what she could not believe, and rescued from despondency only by the support of free-thinking friends.
He's a philosopher, I'm the historian. Okay. As a young child, my downtown Cincinnati church was like a second home. I mean, for one thing, we spent lots of time there, twice on Sunday, Wednesday night, Saturday morning. That was enough. And there were structured children's activities and lots of hiding places where I loved to escape and explore. Thanks to our Aunt Fanny, there were children's theater experiences, Sunday school, and 2 weeks of vacation Bible school called for lots of singing and memorized Bible verses. All my idea of fun. At age 8, I was eligible to sing in the children's choir with the person who also conducted the adult choir. He complimented my singing and encouraged me to keep it up. Love that man. Now, at age 12, the youth were expected to join the church. Well, there was no catechism or confirmation, but there were 2 things required for membership: baptism by immersion and the promise to take Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Okay. I confessed to our youth leaders that I didn't understand what that meant and that I had trouble making such a promise. They assured me that if I would just say it over and over and over, it would come true for me. Faulty reasoning, even at that age. So perhaps church membership was not for me. My mother, however, had a better angle on the situation and assured me that one needed to be a church member in order to sing in the adult choir. Well, that cinched it. I was submerged. Now, all of my friends were church family, but several years later, there was a schism in the congregation when some were unwilling to serve and invite people of the downtown neighborhood into our building. Now, most members just came in from the burbs, and although they had hired assistant pastors to minister to those in the immediate area, the reality of real acceptance by the majority was lacking. The final outrage came with the firing of the 2 members of the ministerial staff for going to Selma. Such blatantly racial prejudice made me question Christianity altogether. What about those Jesus teachings of serving and loving our neighbors?
Okay. While Barbara and my church-going habit persisted after we arrived in Des Moines, our settling into this congregation was delayed by our dabbling in several other religious communities. My falling asleep during an American Friends meeting suggested that maybe that wasn't the place for us. While falling asleep up front in the choir at the church where my Drake Dean was in attendance, suggested that was professionally risky. I've fallen asleep here too, most memorably when Zenda Lindell, a remarkable personality, from the pulpit urged me in her soothing tones, "Bruce, wake up!" You might keep that handy because you might need to say that sooner rather than later. Well, I suspect we're all here today for many shared reasons, each of us with slightly different priorities. Barbara and I were finally drawn to the church by its reputation for liberalism. This was during the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. By the warm welcome extended to us, and by the sizable group of other young adults. I think only David and Corinne Whitlatch remain of that group. John Isom was the beloved minister then. He and his wife Aline would become especially close to us and our children. You can see a plaque back there on the wall honoring them, as it should. We were happy among a choir of good singers, right up there in the loft. And I never imagined I'd be playing services regularly, as we had a dedicated organist and wonderful musician in Margot Heilman, who became a close friend, and after she turned the direction of the choir over to me, a valued collaborator. If you go outdoors, the organ console is still there on your right. You can see a plaque remembering Margot. Since then, my reasons for attendance have shifted in order of importance. After a period of increased musical participation and a sense of community, I came to realize how much I valued particular individuals here as role models in their personal conduct and their contributions to this and the larger community. But even that reevaluation was eventually superseded or perhaps folded into another one. 50 years after encountering my first great religious teacher, I found a second one. I later told Mark Stringer that I never regretted hearing his sermons twice and often 3 times each week for several years. I would notice slight changes in his wording or inflection, even while I was reading off stage, which I do a lot during the sermons. But this was a sure sign that I was paying attention. And while not many specifics come to mind, I gained from Mark a heightened appreciation for commonplace experiences as a source of meaning. More important, he made me realize my larger reason for being here. While technically I'm with you most Sundays to play the piano, I've come to value this church principally as a place to sort things out, to reflect on and perhaps change my conduct, my values, and my outlook on life. After teaching for 40 years, where I was expected to share my ideas with students and colleagues, and even to get some published, it's a great relief to exchange them in a non-academic setting, or to keep them to myself. Talking to you this way, of course, is a radical surrender of that privacy. But preparation for today has afforded me an equally radical chance to sort things out a bit further.
Bruce and I have experienced a lot of changes here, 56 years. Well, for example, from the pulpit, there have been 6 full-time ministers, 2 interims, 1 informal contractor, a year of service committee volunteers, an assistant minister, and most recently, a transitional minister. Would you believe, when we arrived here in 1967, there was a minister who was mostly the preacher, his wife, who was mostly the pastoral care leader, a secretary who did most everything else with the help of volunteers. Those were the full-time staff. Then there were part-time staff, the RE director, organist choir director, and custodian. The major mode of communication was the weekly newsletter, as we have now, which involved, actually, the old mimeograph machine that you would have to crank them out of, and then you needed to fold them up because it wasn't until later that the machine actually did that. And then you'd have to put the label on, and you'd have to stamp the postage. So much fun. Thank goodness for volunteers. And they usually mailed out about 200 copies. Well, since then, we've witnessed a dramatic increase in members and staff, space and budget and technology. Church services went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 2 and then back to 1. We Unitarians put our religion in the deep freeze during the summer, joked John Isom. And for many years, this was the case. Eventually, things thawed out a little bit with the introduction of a lay-led patio church outside in the summer times. And once we got air conditioning, there were more structured lay-led services inside, something like today. Now, the church has served as home to a variety of outside groups, with 2 such ventures of particular interest to me. In the 1970s, the drama workshop distinguished the church as a cultural attraction to the play-going community, allowing the Metropolitan Church, Christian Church, and an LGBTQ group to use our auditorium on Sunday nights in the early 80s, broadened our tolerance among many of us. Now, neither arrangement, of course, was without controversy. Believe it. The workshop's costume storage competed with the space in the large activity room with rummage accumulating that was important for fundraising for the church. Okay. And these productions also tied up what's now Griffin Hall for many weeks during the year. You can imagine the logistic problems. Now, problems with the Metropolitan Group involved the perceived risk of renting to an organization that had suffered several bombings in their other cities, plus some remaining prejudice against gays and lesbians, though it did help prepare the church to become a welcoming congregation in 1992. Mark Stringer became the first minister to marry a gay couple in Iowa on his front lawn, as you may recall, and put the church on the map. And the subsequent marriage of 8 lesbian couples from Minnesota in a 2-hour ceremony took us even further in the direction of inclusiveness. Adaptation and acceptance of change have proven to be stimulating and interesting and part of the intrigue of attending here. I somehow thought we Unitarians could escape the complexity of being human. How naive. Nevertheless, when I enter here on Sundays, I still feel a sense of belonging, a sense of adventure as to who I'll meet, what I'll learn, what's to eat. I feel at home after these many years and reminisce about the many things here for which I'm grateful. For one thing, our children's sex education and their youth groups comprised of the church kids and their community friends who were not content to be called LRY. You know what that stands for? Liberal religious youth. Thank you. But characteristically called themselves Calvin. Creative, analytical, liberal, very interesting, non-conformists. I don't know how long it took them to come up with that. And when I see the long list of organizations that are nominated each year by our members for our social justice collections, I realize just a sampling of what our members are actively involved with in the community. Immigrant sponsorship and the efforts to make us a sanctuary church. Those who have housed immigrants for long periods of time. These members and these programs and so many more are major reasons to be grateful for this congregation. I love being part of projects that others are willing to spearhead. Thank you. But most of all, I'm grateful for relationships, for the face-to-face encounters at coffee hour, circle exchanges at forum and circle suppers and soul matters and small groups and fun food events and semicircle choirs, of course. And not to be missed, the surprising circle gatherings of dear longtime friends who help me celebrate special life events. Yes, I know there's nothing to be sure of. As the song says, I've had cataracts, troubles, and tears, and I have sat alone in the weeds. But in your midst, I can feel young and accepted by those who are young, and I'm so happy to be here with you.
One more shot. And let me find it here. Hang on. Here we go. What I'm about to say is not meant to offend anybody or even to persuade. Thank you, Harvey. Really, thanks. But I'm afraid that the great question that gets so much attention here and elsewhere, and everyone, or most everyone, feels compelled to answer, I find singularly uninteresting. I mean, it's not that I believe or don't believe there's a God is that I've never really cared. I don't think it matters. It certainly doesn't matter to me. God, no God. It's immaterial. But what does matter are the many things in life that I find, for want of another word, sacred. Things like human affection and kindness, or beauty in its many forms, or the many wonders of the universe and nature, or the human mind. Certain places feel this way for me. Each time I have picked up a grandchild at school, I felt myself in sacred territory. Sacred in suggesting the wonders of childhood and its vistas into the future. Sometimes art museums make me feel this way. My susceptibility to writing or music, however, knows no particular place. I remember having to pull my car to the side of the road to really feel for the first time, despite multiple exposures from childhood, the intense beauty and force of Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, which I tried to share with you earlier in the morning, if you could hear it. It's beautiful, just stunning, and so familiar. Outdoor places can affect me this way too. My personal favorite is just down the road on George Flagg Parkway at about Southwest 30th. The view of the Raccoon River up toward the pedestrian bridge or downstream toward downtown, I usually find exciting whenever I go there, especially when I walk there. Presumably other places move you in the same way. But hopefully, like me, you can recall instances of being surprised by human empathy and decency. Most commonly, this can come from family members or others we know well, but also from those we don't know so well, or even strangers. Many years ago, during an especially troubling time for me, one of my fellow musicians on a band job, a fellow who never said much of anything, sensed somehow what was up and suggested that we talk. Our later lengthy conversation gave me a perspective on myself and my situation, for which I expressed and continue to feel immense gratitude. I've had many such surprises in distant places too, as when we were walking in a large plaza in Istanbul, and a man tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I think you dropped this." It was a large wad of Turkish cash worth hundreds of American dollars. I'd put it in my side pocket to avoid being pickpocketed from the rear. He walked away before I could reward him with anything but a cursory thank you. Now, don't think that such instances of wonder visit me regularly, predictably, or even very often. I know, too, that they're not equally given to everyone. Life is not necessarily marked by wonder, as it often teems with misfortune and cruelty. For too many, it is, in the words of Thomas Hobbes, nasty, brutish, and short. I was just thinking yesterday, this courageous and apparently highly principled presidential candidate in Ecuador who was assassinated just this week. I mean, there are so many people every day who die extremely early in life through natural or unnatural causes. It's all a crapshoot. However, even obscure everyday human behavior can help make life not what it should be. For example, it's not just jealous or selfish politicians or religious hucksters who invoke religion for perverse ends. Consider how ordinary folk of a religious bent too often act in ways sharply counter to the beliefs they profess. That's why I'm glad to be a Unitarian, right? Contrary to what Barbara suggested, we never violate any of our 7 principles. Maybe I'm projecting on the basis of my misdeeds, badly chosen words, or thoughts, and we're not going to examine any of those today. But I suspect we're as capable of self-deception and hypocrisy as any group, religious or otherwise. It's so distressing that we, the salt of the earth, miss the mark so widely. But this distress is nothing compared to what I occasionally feel when I contemplate the immense problems facing our world, our nation, our state of Iowa. Hey, enough to drive me to the doctrine of original sin, or at least the Freudian death wish, to understand the tendency of us humans to screw things up for ourselves and others. It's a cause for negative wonder, really. Now, church-going is virtually dead in Europe and disappearing in the U.S. But long absences have convinced me that I can't operate that way. I need this place to rescue me from total pessimism about the world. To hear thoughtful persons insist that we Unitarians, we Iowans, we Americans, we citizens of the world can survive, even against long odds, if only by the skin of our teeth. Such rescue is an occasion for wonder. Perhaps we can all find more instances of wonder in our lives and try to secure it for others, which can bring its own wonder. However, wonder can be a verb as well as a noun, as in the sense of wonder about, which suggests ongoing adjustment and outlook. I want the weight of our phrase, faith formation, to fall in the formative process more than final belief. And I have a feeling that my own faith formation is just beginning. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And I want to especially thank Sarah and Bill for their help this morning. We have, I'm not sure about time, but we have one more hymn, and I want to say something about it. It's only slightly related to what we've been talking about today. When we arrived at the Unitarian Church in the late 60s, immediately we were told about great Unitarians of the past, Emerson, Margaret Fuller, William Ellery Channing, and so forth. And then some names were thrown in that I said, I don't think so. I don't think Charles Darwin or Charles Dickens were Unitarians, but I didn't argue with them. They wanted to believe that. Okay, but when they started, I don't know who they were, talking about famous people in the past who were Unitarians without realizing it, I said, whoa, wait a minute. By that logic, Jesus was a Unitarian. Jesus, Gandhi, Socrates. Try Bertrand Russell on. He would love that. He would be irate from the even suggestion. The reason we've chosen today's second hymn is that it was written by a bona fide Unitarian. James Russell Lowell was a Unitarian all of his adult life. He was an activist in the abolitionist cause. And unfortunately, the words of the poem to which the music is set, or vice versa, the words of his poem are as timely today as they were when he wrote them.